Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we have our all famous speaker for global peace. We have Professor Edwards, Mr. Marshall, Mr. Kumar, Professor Donalds, Professor David J. Kelly, and Madam Dulcie. I want to start from Professor Edward.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Obviously, we prefer to be talking about some other technical topics, but given what's happening in the world today, this is a very important topic. And I'll just preface my remarks by saying that I was teaching international relations in Munich in 1980-81 when I first visited what was the Soviet Union. I was involved there in 1989 and 1990, as well as in the Baltics, dealing with dissidents and reformers, frankly, to overthrow the system and to push for free market reforms. And what happened, of course, was that the Baltics, the Czech Republic, and a lot of the others not only broke away from the East Bloc, but basically initiated the kind of reforms that have made them more prosperous. And that's the good news. Unfortunately, after trying to do that, Russia became essentially an oligarchy, with pretty corrupt leaders, and that they didn't prosper the way the others did. Essentially, Russia now is pretty much a gas station with nuclear weapons. They're not really a world-class economy. And unfortunately, Putin's drive is to restore some kind of national pride through basically conquering areas that used to be part of the old Soviet Union or the old Soviet bloc. But I want to make a couple of points. And this is when you talk about peace, I like to look at Winston Churchill, who's, if he had been listened to in the 1930s, we might not have had World War II. The way you make sure that you have peace is you understand what's happening in the world and you try to keep it from getting to a point where you have what's happening in Ukraine today. So first, and then I'm going to say a few things about what I think Asia can do to make sure that we have, a peaceful world in that part of the world, frankly, the whole world. Putin, it basically is an old KGB thug. Let's remember, he killed one of his critics in London. He tried to poison and kill the former president of Ukraine. I actually knew this gentleman's wife. Fortunately, he didn't succeed. But that's what we're basically dealing with, is a pretty vicious KGB thug. But he was looking at when to launch his attack. And what he did was he looked at President Biden as part of the Obama administration and, of course, as president. And let me tell you, this is how these folks think. What he saw was that in 1994, under the Budapest Memorandum, the Ukrainians gave up their nuclear weapons with a promise from Russia, and this is the quote, to respect the independence and existing borders of Ukraine. That's what is in the accord that the Russians signed in 1994 to get the Ukrainians to give up their nuclear weapons. What happened since that time? Well, what you saw, for example, is that when Obama was elected president, and of course Biden was part of that administration, when millions of Iranians came out into the streets demonstrating against the mullahs, Obama did not give his support the way Reagan, for example, gave his support of anti-communists in the East Bloc. In March 2012, basically in an interview that was caught on microphone, Obama promised the then president, a puppet of Putin's, that after the election, he would have more, his words were, more flexibility to do things that the Russians wanted concerning missile defense, for example, which the Russians didn't want. What happened, of course, is that Obama did not head off Putin's invasion of Ukraine, the first invasion of Ukraine. And then you saw, of course, Vice President Biden was tasked with getting a base agreement for the Iraqis in Iraq to keep some minimal forces there to make sure that Islamists didn't arise. And of course, he failed. The Americans pulled out, and you saw ISIS rising. And then, of course, you saw the fiasco in Afghanistan. So if Putin is looking at this, what he's seeing is Biden is a very weak president, a very foolish president. I can go into Ukraine, they'll protest, but I can get away with it. The other big thing, of course, why this happened is that the Germans especially, but other Europeans decided that they wanted to get rid of all fossil fuels and nuclear. But you can't run an industrial economy, I'm sorry, on wind and solar. So what happened was, of course, Germany became dependent on Russia for fossil fuels. And so Putin is looking at this and saying, all I got to do is threaten to turn it off, and they'll protest what I'm doing, but they won't be able to do anything about it. And that's the situation that the climate alarmists have put us in. Now, the good news, there is some good news, believe it or not, is that the Ukrainians, of course, have been fighting back, that the Russian military is kind of understanding, and especially the troops are saying, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Why are we in Ukraine? These are our brothers. We shouldn't be killing them. You see protesters out in the street in Russia against the regime. And I think that as they put pressure on the oligarchs, seizing their yachts, seizing their bank accounts, what is going to happen, what certainly should happen, is eventually they're going to overthrow Putin. That's, I think, the best path to peace. And the other thing, of course, that would really do it, but unfortunately they're not doing it, is if Biden allowed for energy production in this country, we would not only reduce the energy prices here, which would be good for us, but we would collapse the energy prices internationally. Russia would not have the money either. That would basically bring Putin to heel and hopefully have him overthrown. What is the lesson for Asia and the rest of the world? The lesson is this. I like to say, make trade, not war. That's a better way of doing things. Or make science, not war, for that matter, with the research that a lot of us are engaged in. But what that requires is a community of values. In other words, where people in Malaysia and people in the United States and people in Britain and people in go down the list really care about humanity. They really care about productive efforts, curing diseases, bringing prosperity, allowing businesses to grow, and so forth. That is a community of values that in the long run we have to foster. The big, really big conflict is going to come with China. I'm sorry. Xi is just as big a thug as Putin. You see what he did in Hong Kong. You see what he's threatening with Taiwan. But the difference is that China is an industrialized country to a greater extent. We get most of our smartphones from China. They're not just a gas station like Russia is. And so that's where we really have to focus on China and seeing what we can do ahead of time to prevent the sort of thing that happened in Ukraine. Folks, this is realpolitik, okay? This is not just an academic discussion. I've been involved on the ground in this sort of stuff. And so we really have to look ahead, foster that community of values, work with our friends in Malaysia and Pakistan and India and all of the Asian areas to basically say, we want this kind of a world of prosperous business people and researchers and so forth, not a world where you basically have China trying to establish, the Middle Kingdom again by basically taking over and controlling the areas around them, as well as Africa, which is the other area where China is going in. So those are my opening remarks. Maybe they're controversial, but I'm sorry. Realpolitik is what I've been involved in. And so, that's the deal.
Okay.
So, thank you
Mr.
very
Marshall.
much.
Well, thank you, Sharif. Ed, I think your comments are well taken. Realpolitik is the reality that we're in right now. So I totally agree with you there.
Sadly.
So I'm going to address a little different slant on this, not to contradict what you say or even take away from what you said. I think everything you said is spot on for the most part, or all of it. What I would like to share with people is that if we're going to reach world peace, and we've had in Europe, at least in the United States, has been since World War II, a feeling of a sensibility of world peace. And where we see that the most is what's happening in Germany today. If people remember, none of us, I think, on this, and even our audience probably doesn't remember World War II, or we're not old enough to, probably weren't even born then. But in World War II, we had a devastating world war that included Asia and Europe and every country on the planet was just about involved in that war. During that process, there was huge destruction in Europe and Asia, and the democracies essentially won the war, but at great cost. And the Germans lost the war at great cost. And what happened was two things I'd like to point out. One is that after the war, Germany made a concerted effort, even up until just a few weeks ago, never to arm themselves to some extent, other than through NATO and their local army, but not to be an offensive force because of what happened in World War II. And they took an not an oath, but they took a commitment to not arm other countries, and that included, even up until a few weeks ago, even Ukraine. They were considering not doing that because of the cultural bias towards an anathema towards conflict, because the conflict was so great that even today's generation of young Germans have some transmission of that memory from their parents and their grandparents. So this is something that has played a great role. What we're seeing is a significant change just in the last few weeks. And the reason is because the thug, Putin, as Ed called him, and I call him a bully, but bully or thug, that's one and the same, has made a calculation that at any cost they're prepared to reestablish, or Putin is prepared to reestablish a reincarnation of the Soviet Union and its empire prior to its collapse. As everybody probably knows on this in this audience out there, Putin was a KGB agent. He was a mid-level agent. Up until he became president, he was really unknown. Putin was trained in tactics. That's what the KGB trains its agents for, so they can act immediately. Strategy was left to the higher ups. I don't think he's a strategic thinker as much as he might be cleverer than we think, but never underestimate your opponent. But I think what's happening with Putin in regards to our topic today of world peace, he knows that people want world peace, and I think he's underestimated the resolve of people to come together. And one of the things he did that I think was a grave mistake is he threatened nuclear warfare. He activated his tactical nuclear weapons, and thinking that he can bully people and that they will collapse. Something else that I'd like to point out from a military point of view, the Russian army is not doing well other than its missiles. If the United States had offered, or Europe had offered anti-missile technology like the Patriot missiles earlier on and had them in place, I think the Soviet army would be in a big problem, big trouble. So that kind of sends a message, unintended consequence. What do I mean by that? The Russian army, the Russian Federation army, is not doing well. It's breaking down. It is making headway through overwhelming force, which, by the way, is what they used against the Nazis in World War II. They used barrages of Katyushas to take on the Nazis. And in fact, the Nazis at Stalingrad used up all their ammunition and had to retreat. They killed so many Russians, it was unbelievable. So the Russians are, the Russian, like Stalin or Putin, are prepared to sacrifice their people at the cost of what they want. But as we know, people don't live forever. Stalin didn't live forever, and Putin will not live forever. The question is, will we outlive Putin? And will he activate his nuclear weapons at any cost? So for world peace to occur, we need, I think, to take from Ed's page book, the concept that we need to prepare in advance. And we haven't done such a good job in Europe nor the United States to do that. And why do I say that? Europe is highly dependent on the LNG, the liquid natural gas that comes out of the Soviet Union. I still call them the Soviet Union, out of the Russian Federation. A lot of people, especially, and this is more important for this forum, the developing world, especially Africa, is highly dependent on the fertilizers and the wheat and the other agricultural products that come out of the Ukraine and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, out of Russia. So that's a big problem, and it's going to it's going to make some people say, well, we can't afford this. We'll have to bow to whatever Putin wants. Obviously, that's a grave mistake, because at the end of the day, a bully never stops. And once he gets his way, he's just encouraged to do more. The issue I'm pretty confident in is that if he attacks any NATO country, then he will have crossed the line, and we, and the United States and the European Union and the NATO countries will respond. I don't know if he understands that, and I don't think he cares, because at the end of the day, he'll be in a bunker, and if nuclear weapons go off, he thinks he's going to survive. I think that's what goes through his mind, or he doesn't care. That's a dangerous existential threat to world peace. If we want world peace, the history has taught us from the establishment of the great wars of the 20th century, World War I and World War II, and other wars since then, is that you don't do war for war's sake. You do war for a mission to create world peace and to establish that. The big mistake of the United States when it was attacked on 9/11, it went into Afghanistan, okay, but then it went into Iraq, and it went back and it stayed 20 years in Afghanistan. It didn't need to do that. It should have done something different. World peace is about people coming together of like mind and standing up to bullies. That's what it's about. There's always going to be bullies in this world. We've seen that in the 20th century. The 21st century is no different. We're seeing that already at the beginning of the 21st century. So my takeaway from this in the early discussion of world peace is hope for the best, prepare for the worst. That's what we need to do. And to hope for the best, we need to take action, like Ed said, that will guarantee or essentially try to guarantee that people will work together in light of like-minded democracies, and to save not just the democracies, but to save the democracies and the rest of the developing world. In my humble opinion, the developing world is the linchpin to success against Putin, believe it or not. And that's why we partner with the World Talent Economy Forum to make sure that the developing world addresses a lot of issues. The ones we address is a greater threat. There's a bigger threat than Putin right now, believe it or not. He's the one that's immediate, but right behind him is biodiversity, tidal wave, and climate crisis tidal wave. It's huge. No matter what we do with Putin, at the end of the day, we may not all be around after 20 in 7 or 8 years or even 10 years because of the climate crisis. And the canary in the coal mine is the Thwaites Glacier, and it's already flooding the southern hemisphere, parts of Indonesia, parts of the cities are going under. It's going to add, once the Thwaites Glacier fully melts, which it can't be stopped at this point, it's going to add 20 feet of water. It's about 2 meters, I think, roughly, or at least 2 meters of water for sure. Wall Street itself is only half a meter below sea level. I mean, above sea level. So you're going to need a gondola to get to Wall Street to trade your stocks in the United States. So I'm saying we need to take a holistic approach to this, not a single approach. I understand how people's attention is focused on what's going on in Ukraine, as it should be. I'm not saying it shouldn't be, it should be, but we need to understand that we need a multidisciplinary, multi-approach to this world crisis to establish world peace. World peace will not end with the end of Putin. The world peace will not be successful just with the end of Putin. We need to address biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Thank you. Madam Dulce, what you want to add for today's discussion, especially we are discussing about global peace. We know about Ukraine issues and many people actually suffering, especially women and children. Many people died. So what is your view?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me now. Okay, good. It's really terrible what's happening. As far as all the images of mothers and families and what they're experiencing there, it's very heartbreaking. And my heart goes out to everybody. And I really think that it's just awful what's happening overall. But I feel that there's a bigger issue that is affecting all of us right now, that Putin and people in Russia and in other parts of the world really understand how to capitalize on, and that's social engineering. And we're all suffering from it. um, and the internet is just a vast place to give as much disinformation and tailoring a narrative as much as they can. I'm looking at this war through the lens of a Southern California mother, and the information that's being socially engineered to me, and what I see is the suffering of other mothers, and the trials that they have to go through, and that's very impacting me on an emotional level. But I do understand that that's being engineered my way, to in that way. And I do take the time to see alternative information, and I scour Twitter to get different details from people. But overall, I'm seeing that there is a lot of discord between people on how to approach this war, how to put it out in the media, how to discuss it with each other. There's a lot of infighting happening going on between people that are here in the United States of European descent, and that discord is uh, is being taken advantage of. It's being manipulated. Um, People are using the algorithm to stir more discord in that way. I personally have been taking a major break from Facebook during this period, because I don't want to be manipulated to feel and react and to engage with family members the same way that I was manipulated to do that back when Trump was in office. I lost family members. We want world peace. We can't do it by breaking up our own families based on ideas that don't necessarily fit with each other. We're going to have difference of ideas in our world. And if we don't give each other the space to express those things, or really show the true nature of what's happening to each other, and we're masking it or we're manipulating the message, we're never going to have world peace. We're always going to have this discord. We're always going to be fighting each other, and not necessarily in physical fighting like Putin's doing right now by invading and taking over and bombing. But we're heading into the metaverse, and we're going to have different ways of fighting people. Psyops operations are going to be more prevalent. People going after you and trying to take your identity and trying to take your whole everything from you, more than just land and boundaries on the earth. They're going to do that in these new spaces as well, and that's very important for us to think about as we're moving forward. These the old fashioned 20th century military industrial complex, that's still operating. It's still very scary. It's still there. But that's going to be transitioning into something completely different in this new 21st century. And, what does that mean? And how, if we want world peace, how do we have the vision to, correct it, course correct it, and make sure that we eliminate as much discord as possible? Um, there's a lot of disinformation out there, and Putin definitely has been taking advantage of that. And I personally know several people who have gotten hacked, severely hacked, in this last 2 weeks, because it's very active right now. The message is being skewed, and people are very much in this state of isolating themselves and isolating their ideas, um, and that's bad. So we need to figure out how to solve that. Social engineering to me is the most important aspect of what's going on right now, like health wise, mental health wise for people, because it's very obvious. And I, I'm all about standards and ethics when we're moving into the metaverse and what that means. And a new form of war is really something I think we need to think about. We need to really think about how do we stop engaging in this physical way and do it in a more, logical, virtual way, and um, also try to eliminate all the social engineering that's going on, the very calculated, targeted type of social engineering. And big corporations participated in this as well. They have their algorithms, very manipulative. That's a form of social engineering. But then you've got another layer on top of people who know how to manipulate those tools and use them to stir everybody's ideas and cause discord. So
Thank you.
that's my thing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Professor Donald. And then I come to Professor David Jekali. Professor Donald first. Yeah.
Okay, one sec. Okay. Well, if you look at what's happening right now, one of the things that we're doing is, I think both the economists and others call it a nuclear option, because the amount of the sanctions right now, the amount of sanctions that we have are unprecedented. Like by cutting them off from the SWIFT system. The SWIFT system is the system that's used as an intermediary for transfers. So basically, it acts kind of as a escrow system, so that you can make sure that the people that are sending the money actually have the money to send. And that's how money is transferred between countries right now, or the major way. The MasterCard and Visa just pulled out, Coca-Cola pulled out. But interestingly enough, I really support what Madam Duga just said, which is that the information part of it is incredibly important. I was just reading an interesting article yesterday where people would call their family from Ukraine. People in Ukraine have family in Russia. People in Russia have family in Ukraine. I mean, the two countries are have done trade and interacted with each other for a long time. But Ukrainian is a different language, and they have a different culture. They're not Russians. So there's a large Russian area in Ukraine with proximity to Russia, which is what Putin is using as an excuse to attack. There's separatists, though they're a minority in the Russian area. So with that little bit of background, the Ukrainian have been calling their family in Russia and telling them what's going on, and they don't believe it. They have been told that Zelensky is a drug addict and a Nazi, which is kind of weird, being as he's Jewish. He's not a very good candidate for being a Nazi. But and of course, to the rest of the world, Zelensky is just an incredible hero. I mean, he's, what has he said? He said, I need ammunition, not a ride, was his line that was inspired everyone. And so as Madam Duga was saying, the Russians just can't get the information that they need, because the Russian people are not for this. I was in contact with about 4 Russians in Russia until they cut off Twitter. And they knew what was going on, and they're like, we don't want to kill Ukrainians. I mean, there's been reports of people in Russia just walking away and surrendering, because when they found out they had to kill Ukrainians, they didn't want to do it. So they just surrendered. And the Ukrainians up till now have been very kind to the Russian deserters, but they are getting shelled. And if they catch anybody that's an artillery person that's been shelling them, they're not going to be kind to They've made that clear. So I agree with Edward to the extent that I think the trade is very stabilizing, because I think right now China is looking at what happened to Russia and how China couldn't go very far if we did the same thing to China. I mean, China would really tank because their whole thing is exports. It's supporting their economy. And if we stop the exports to China, they would be in deep trouble. This is a nuclear option, what we're doing right now. It's never been done before, and it's scary, the idea that we could start doing this. It's the opposite of the kind of trade that we want, that hopefully will be stabilizing. It's ending trade. And the results of it is that Russia might be more isolated and more crazy. And by the information system, they'll be more likely to believe that they're under attack and more likely to want to go out and kill people because they're not interacting with the rest of the world. As far as peace is concerned, I think I just checked, and one of the most destabilizing things is economies that are extraction economies. And what that means is that they create most of their wealth through something like oil or some other resource that they can extract. Because what winds up happening is that a very few people start controlling the oil or whatever it is like that. And because of that, it gives power to a very few people. And psychologically, that makes people crazy. So it's a real deal where we're just kind of by the force of so it seems to me that the answer to that is obvious, and it goes to something Marshall is frequently saying, is that we've got to stop using we've got to stop using the stuff that allows the people to create these extraction economies, and it's destabilizing the world. And of course, that the main thing like that is oil. And I strongly disagree with what Edward says about how there's a climate alarmist and the climate change isn't really happening, because it's happening. I mean, there's absolutely no question about it. I mean, they said that 98% of scientists believe that it was happening, and that number's wrong. It's 100%. And there's absolutely no question about it. I spent some hours going through looking at the people that were contradicted it, and they weren't in real journals. They were in what we call predatory journals, where they pay to be in these journals. I could not find through any means whatsoever an actual real working scientist that disagreed with it.
Professor Donald, we have a debate on climate change this week, so maybe we will arrange this debate.
Okay,
we will invite.
But what I say is that we have to start getting like moving from these extraction economies, and that's one of the most. So really, what I'm saying is that there's three things. One is trade. One is safe communication. Like we had a thing on that, which is it can't be disinformation. People have to, and that can't be fixed by just stopping disinformation. That people have to understand what disinformation is and understand methods of cross-checking what they hear, so that they come to make decisions themselves about what's real and what's not real. And there's ways of doing it. I mean, university researchers have done it forever. And then, so communication, and then finally, we've got to change our energy mix and other things like rare earth metals are controlled by China right now, though we have some in the United States. And so we should really be working on distributing the resources, if to the extent we can, so you don't develop this kleptocracy, is basically what you call it. And so those are the three things that we really need to do. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor David J. Kelly, what you want to analyze is specifically, we want to learn because according to our research and some information we are observing, last year's until December, we are observing the arms business and this kind of business actually increasing, especially the G20, like country like USA, Russia, China actually excluding, they are not nobody knows what is happening inside China, but all of the big countries they are involving, they are increasing investment in the arms business, and major importers actually from Middle East, from these India's, and these are the countries, and we are observing this kind of chaos and this kind of problem. What do you think? Like how we can manage these industries, and is it threat for the global peace, and what we should do, like especially the first world people should do to control this arms business?
Well, I mean, countries need to be able to defend themselves, so I'm not really against the arms business per se. Just before I answer it, my position on this whole Ukrainian war.
Professor Edward, I cannot hear you.
You're talking. Can you guys hear me?
I hear him.
Okay.
I hear it.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can hear you fine.
A little low, but we can hear you.
I wonder if I'm using the right mic. Let me just check and make sure. Default. Is this any better?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So before I answer the question about arms, my position on the Ukrainian war, I agree with a lot of what people have said, but I do think we should have a much stronger military response. We should enforce this no-fly zone. We should be providing weapons. We can't allow the same thing we saw in World War II to happen again. And essentially, by letting Putin get away with this, we're emboldening another tyrant. We already saw what happens when you do that in World War II. And I'm not saying, any of the other wars in the past 50 years have been right, but in this particular case, it's very, very dangerous for us to tolerate it at all. And if I was in charge, we already would have been engaged against Russia actively. It just we just can't. It can't be tolerated at all. Now, in terms of the arms business, I do think it's dangerous. Obviously, I think that at the same time we can't just prohibit that kind of stuff. Countries need to be able to defend their sovereignty. One would think that in the modern age that countries would be mature enough to work things out peaceably, but obviously that doesn't work in all cases. I think it's good that we discourage weapons of mass destruction, and we should prevent that sort of stuff at all possible, and even actively. And in a lot of cases, the world has done that over the past 50 years. But it's not something we can really just outright ban or regulate without endangering the sovereignty of nations. And it's like in the case of Russia, I think on one hand we can't prevent people from buying and selling weapons, and with Russia even, except in a case like this where it's an international concerted effort to undermine what Russia's trying to do, which I think is a good thing. We can't risk psychotic tyrants running around with nuclear weapons. Just we can't do it.
Excellent. Mr. Kumar, I know you are not decision maker from India, but what do you want to share, especially the Russia and Indian relationship? India actually taking some steps. It's actually proved that uh, they are silent, they are politicians. Maybe it creates some miscommunication in the global arena. What do you think, as a scholar from India? What do you think about your, especially the political people role in this wire?
First of all, thank you, Sharif, for bringing this topic. I mean, yeah, mentally, physically, we are disturbed, and our pieces are being shaken a little bit, and justice is not given for everybody. And I would say, like as you rightly said, uh, keeping silence is also a biggest mistake what we do in our life. When the United Nations was asking for a vote, and India and China took a call that they want to go neutral, they didn't take a stand in either in US or with Russia. So I feel that's not the right move we should take. We have to speak for the country. Should not keep ourselves mum and then say no to anything. And of course, I wanted to state, I mean, as Edward was saying and Marshall was saying about the president of Russia, thug and bully. I wanted to call him Thanos because it just the same thing how Thanos does. Because whoever he wants to keep, he keeps. The rest of the people, he wants to just destroy them and then keep his own planet with him. So I don't go with that, and I'm really disturbed in a way that after seeing a lot of Ukrainian students here in Scotland, talking to them, understand their mindset and how they are deeply stressed, and I felt very bad, and even Indian students who got stuck in those countries, and a lot of I mean politically influenced action has been taken, and because of that a lot of areas are getting disturbed. And of course, Madam Duzel was saying about how the metaverse is going to affect. I recently read that the cyber crime is going to cost us almost $6 trillion for us. It's taking huge amount of hit in our metaverse world, in the virtual world. And in order to keep that, I would say the government, we need a more strong government to take action, to have a say in that. And of course, the institutions and the businessmen has to back them up to support the whole cause. Yeah, thank you, Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kumar. Mr. Adam, if you share some of your experience from Europe, Mr. Kumar also in Europe, I think he's in Scotland.
Scotland, yeah,
So,
that's
what
cool.
happening inside Europe, and what is the mindset of the people, like European people?
Thank you, Sharif. Well, as Edward quite rightly said at the beginning, Putin is indeed ex-KGB, which speaks for itself. And he also highlighted another important point that Biden is something of an imbecile, and every single day his gaffes, his wobbles, and his mistakes have been endless fodder for humor and meme channels on YouTube. And thirdly, China is also another one to watch and be careful of. I think China is on a whole another level. It's in a class of its own for atrocities and cruelty and evil. So I think we should call a spade there. Concerning Russia and Ukraine, one interesting trope I observed in like the alt-right and the new right, this new wave of young rightists, is the aphorism "No more brother wars," which is of course alluding to the World Wars One and Two, of course, and how Europe should unite, or Eurasia even should unite, and never let something like that happen again. So when this kicked off, then yes, it was like, oh, so much for no more brother wars. But unfortunately, that is the problem with ideals, high ideals, dreams. They are unfortunately very slippery things to aim for, like perfection. So it's arguably a noble goal to aim for, but it could be something that one gets closer and closer and closer to without ever actually touching it. I mean, concerning global peace, there is wanting it, which we all do undoubtedly, and there is achieving it, the practical application of measures to cultivating it. And Marshall made another important consideration which we can sum up as fighting for peace, fighting a war to help cultivate a peaceful solution instead of even worse devastation caused by inaction. And I think a less tolerant and more aggressive response, like what David Kelly suggested, would be appropriate. Like you said, emboldening a tyrant and appeasement is not the way to go. But the world is so small now, figuratively, that crises that happen over in the other side of the world, metaphorically, the ripple effects can be felt and measured like an earthquake and a seismograph. And Madame Dulce mentioned the internet, and of course the internet is full of all these different subcultures. So from a cultural observer viewpoint, it was very interesting how only a few years ago you had all these meme compilations about how much of a cool alpha male Putin was, these video clips of him walking edited together, the alpha male walk, so-called, swinging one arm more than the other because of his KGB training, ready to pull a gun out, and all these comments about what a cool guy he was, standing in the rain at the tomb of the unknown soldier and being personable and affable with dogs and puppies. I think it was the Turkmenistani president who gave him an Akita puppy, I think it was. And I'm sure lots of those people are eating their words now. And furthermore, I wanted to echo the concerns of Madame Dulce regarding social engineering. It's the old Hegelian dialectic, which seems to be becoming the old faithful, reliable go-to tactic, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, or Trump and Biden, who is not Trump, left and right, trans and TERFs, and now you support people who support the Ukrainians or the Russians like it's some kind of football game. It's fascinating, but I'm sure we can find examples of Hegelian dialectics as well. And like Mr. Donald said, I also saw video footage of Russian soldiers captured in Ukraine asking, "What are we doing here? We were given incomplete information," and so on, looking upset. But global peace, to get there, might require more radical measures than first thought. We have to hold a mirror up and confront who and what it is we really are as humans, like what is written into our DNA, who and what were our ancestors, what did we evolve and adapt for, millions of years of territorialism, competition, survival, scheming. Will global peace require moral enhancement on the genetic level? Will societal and economic and political intervention be enough? And if not, will it require genetic engineering for moral and ethical enhancement? If yes, then how many people will volunteer to have that, and how many people would refuse it, just putting us back to square one again? So those have been my thoughts.
Thank you. This is really great discussions. I have to go for the concluding remark. Just I want to take one question from our audience. Humaira, she want to know how can we make our world a better place where there is no war, crime, or negativity. Professor Edward, what you want to say about that, and what is your concluding remarks?
Well, in a sense, the answer to that is that we've been trying to do that for thousands of years, and certainly in the modern world for at least 100 years. By the way, NATO was very successful because they had two goals. Number one, to prevent the expansion of the Soviet Union and the communist bloc, and number two, to keep the Europeans from having yet another world war, and to basically tell the Germans and the French guys, make trade, not war, be nice to each other. And that's at least we've had success in that sense. But again, I will endorse certainly the need to stand up to bullies. I'm a big fan of Winston Churchill, who basically through the 1930s said we have to stand up to Hitler. We have to make sure it doesn't come to a world war. And of course, he was correct, but people realized that too late, and we're seeing the same with Putin. I do trust, as I said at the early part of this show, that the Russian people are getting information. Donald is right; they've cut them off, and I'm sure Donald, as well as myself and others, have had contacts with Russian friends about this, but they are getting information. The Russian soldiers going into Ukraine are basically saying, wait a minute, why are we here? The Ukrainians are allowing them to contact their mothers and their parents back in Russia to say, hey, what's happening? We're here, and we're being lied to by the government. So I still see that the end of this is going to come when the oligarchs and the Russian people basically kick out Putin one way or the other. But in the broader sense, I think we have to continue to spread the philosophy of achievement, the Enlightenment view of, let's look at human enhancement rather than human conquest. Let's do what we're doing, what you see countries like South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, now you see Malaysia and so forth doing. Basically, let's focus on creating value, of empowering people. That is I'm in a multinational community right here. We have Muslim stores right next to Jewish stores. We have a Chinese immersion program in my elementary school. I could go over all of it. And it's great because we're not fighting with each other. We're trading with each other. We're enjoying each other's companies at playgrounds with our children. That's ultimately what goes along with free markets. It's free people, free minds, and that's the philosophy we need to spread, as well as free markets and free trade.
Thank you, Professor Edward. Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Sharif. So as a concluding remark, how can we make our world a better place where there is no war crime or negativity? That's a tall order. I agree with Ed. We've been trying to do that for hundreds of years. I think as long as human beings are on this earth, there's always going to be crime. I always think there's going to be negativity, as well as other issues. The underlying premise of this at the human level is, I would say, is psychological. It is a issue of people that have, like Putin, personality disorders of great magnitude, kind of like Hitler and his ilk, and they have no regard for human life. As long as people have no regard for human life, you're never going to have peace on this planet. And the reason is because people are not going to put up with that, and they have to defend themselves, as we see what's going on in Ukraine, even if they have to die on the battlefield and be overrun. That's what's happening in Ukraine right now as we speak. And I agree with one of the speakers that said the U.S. should give the Ukrainians air cover. I totally agree with that. Putin's threatening nuclear war. Well, obviously that gives everybody pause, but he's going to do that no matter what. Once he conquers this, he's going to keep going. And if you don't think so, just look back at what Hitler did in 1939. He did a false flag operation into Poland. He dressed his own soldiers up as Polish soldiers, killed his own soldiers to start a war, claiming that the Poles started the war. This is what we're dealing with. This is the kind of mentality that will not allow us to have world peace unless we do something about not just the cynicism of people, but about the stress and the mental health of people altogether. There are all types of disorders out there, and what we're seeing is a conflagration where more tragedy constitutes more trauma. And I would say at the core basis of humanity is human trauma. That's what you're dealing with. When people are traumatized, they act out in different ways, and nothing is predictable. And some of it is, but most of it is not. And I can just say, from my experience, I have a degree in clinical psychology, that trauma is probably the underlying basis of all of this. You can say that it isn't, but at the core of it, it's trauma. Who knows what Putin's childhood was like? But basically, Freudian psychology is still relevant, in my opinion. And I think that you can look at the human race and say, can you have peace overall? I think it's it's achievable. But I think what we're going to need is a greater threat. Look what happened to Germany in its ability to turn around and say, oh, we're now ready to supply weapons to the Ukrainians, which they were never able to do for the past 30, 40 years. Why? Why is that? Because of an existential threat. And NATO has come together in a way it hasn't. It was being perceived as weak before this. So I think what's happening is right now, in my takeaway on this, is that in order to achieve human peace, unfortunately, we need to address human trauma at the individual level and at the existential level of peoples and humanity. And we also will probably have to see a threat from the outside, like aliens coming down and threatening Earth. Then you'll see something different. That's just the way human nature is. And if you don't accept it, if you don't understand that, I think it's going to be a hard time understanding why we are having such a hard time achieving world peace. But you see it right in front of you. And there will always be the thugs, the bullies, the dictators that will attempt to overtake others. And a lot of it is going to cause more trauma and more alienation at the human level.
Thank you, Madam Dulcie. What's your concluding remark for today?
So I don't believe humanity is capable of achieving world peace. And the reason why I don't believe we're capable of achieving it is many reasons. Couple were just mentioned by Marshall, that world human trauma is generational and it is in the DNA and it goes back hundreds of years, and you have many people on this planet who have experienced that generational trauma. We also have people who idolize and prop up sociopaths throughout history and make them the leaders and put them in positions of power. I'm personally witnessing a very powerful person here in the United States turn into a complete sociopath against his own wife in the public realm of celebrity, and people are calling him genius, and we're witnessing a birth of a sociopath that's being propped up. That is a problem, and if we as individuals continue to prop up those types of people, we're always going to have discord. Humanity needs to start understanding that each and every one of us on an individual level is where we need to start with happiness and peace, and understanding how to work through our own trauma, through speaking with others, through maybe therapy, however it may be. I'm not an advocate for drugging people. We need to talk. We need to connect more. We need to stop isolating ourselves. And that's how we can then start healing ourselves, and we can prop up people who actually are more deserving of the ability to have leadership roles or connect on a deeper level. I don't think that world peace is possible, also because humans are we suffer complacency. We suffer from plateauing in our societies. I believe the term is the hedonic treadmill, where once we've achieved something, we want something, we've achieved it, we've now got it, now on to the next thing. It's never satisfied with what we have. We always are achieving to get more. So even if we do change, like Mr. Adam was saying, we do evolve genetically, and we do evolve with our mech and whatever it is that we're going to use to evolve humanity and go to the next level, we're still going to experience that plateauing. We're going to get to another plateau and then another plateau. And, it's very evident with our technology that that's what's been happening. So we're never going to have happy people all the way. We're always going to have, somebody's got better or more, or, some situation is hurting another group where it's benefiting another group. It's always going to be that way. It's just a matter of finding balance and having more compassion and becoming more understanding as an individual. And I think that's important. Right now, there's this new term going around the internet called conspirituality, where people are saying they're very spiritual, but they have these conspiracy theory minded ideas, and that's not spirituality. When you're thinking that people are out there conspiring against you to put you down or hold you down or to make something awful in your life, that's not equal to spirituality. That's not equal to understanding. So I think people just need to get away from these trendy ideas that are happening. Understand that they're being socially engineered to think and feel certain ways, and start looking deeper inside, connecting more. If the Ukrainian people have family in Russia and vice versa, then we need to make an effort to get those people connected deeper so that they can stop fighting with each other and they can change their region of the world and have that trickle out everywhere else. I see it here in the United States too. There's discord. There's a big fissure between the people here. And, we're on the verge of civil war like every other year. So it's just a matter of understanding each other and having compassion. I think that's the only way that we're going to be able to do this.
Thank you. Professor Donald, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Well, I want to mention quickly about arms. The industrial revolutions are basically caused by revolutions in making arms. And there's a great book about that. And it wasn't factory equipment. It wasn't agriculture for this last industrial revolution. It was because the British Empire was expanding, and they became a great market for guns. And that the manufacturing of weapons improved quite a bit. And then there's spillover. You could look at wars do wind up being causing technological jumps. A lot of the things we use these days were invented in World War II. Penicillin, I can go down the line. That's not the way I'd like to see it done. I agree with the thing about trauma, because I've been researching that and finding that there is an epigenetic component to it. So basically it changes your genes, and you inherit the fear from previous generations. And so that's not something we're going to be easily fixed. In fact, I was thinking about that with Ukraine. We're just creating this future nightmare because of all the people who are going to be traumatized by this war. And I also agree with what Madame Duga says, because ultimately the only way to get over your trauma and anger is you have to get over it. Somebody else getting over it doesn't do any good. One of my favorite lines is from Buddha, and he said, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and hoping the other person will die. It's something that you need to do within yourself to be able to. Now, how are we going to create a world where that's possible? I will say that when women run a country, there's a whole idea of, there's a linguist that became very involved in social things named George Lakoff at Berkeley. And he talks about the idea of metaphors. And we have a metaphor of society where we think of ourselves as protecting ourselves. We have a war and conflict metaphor. We really think of the idea that if you look at business, a popular book is The Art of War. And business is this ruthless thing where you're trying to get other people. But in Finland, my favorite example, I don't think the Russians would mess with Finland, even though it's not part of NATO. This war will expand if they attack a NATO country, because if they attack a NATO country, then NATO is going to go after them, and that's something that I don't think, I would be surprised if Putin did, considering how badly his army is performing right now. But back to that, they concentrate on people. They don't have prisons. They do in a country of 6 million people, there's 3,000 people in prison, a teeny amount. And the prisons look more like college campuses than they look like these brutal places that we have. I would like to see more women leaders and start changing the metaphor of your country as your family, and the country is something that nurtures you, and society is something that's your family and something that nurtures you. And we can change those, over time. But when the other topic for this thing was institutions, and I just want to briefly mention the idea that I think that Europe in general is probably going to be more stable because of the European Union, and they negotiate with each other about everything. It's tedious, it's time consuming, people complain about the regulations, this and that and the other thing, but it's integrated them to such a degree that the whole idea of it being their family is a lot more real to them every day. And so I can see if the world had more of a commitment to international organizations, I think that would help. But I agree with everyone else is that I don't see war ending. I think we can have fewer wars and make them less deadly, but I think that people still think of themselves in this way where they have fear and anger, and that just doesn't go away. It's built into it. As I said, epigenetic means that your genes actually change, so it's built into your genes and passed for generations. So it's not really going to happen. It's a long road. We can make things better, but that's all.
Thank you, Professor David J. Kelly.
Well, as I stated earlier, I strongly support direct military involvement. We cannot tolerate this kind of, regardless of the other issues in society and how we need to change things, and the fact that the environmental issues, all of that aside, we still need to respond militarily against this sort of attack. We can't allow a psycho like Putin to be attacking people.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar.
Yeah. Yes. I would say, I'll give an example. Back in India, in order to bring peace, one of my friend does an innovative way of approaching older people and the young people. What he does is he brings them together in the weekends so that the older people gets the love and fun from the young people, and the young people get the wise advice from the older people. That was an activity he was doing quite often, so that, as everybody says, it's plays with the psychology. You have to address that basic problem. It's a childhood trauma. It has to be understood properly, and then has to be treated properly. So this happens beautifully in that place. When I came to Europe, I saw a lot of young people taking up care center job, and during the training, they told me that they learned compassion, love, and taking up responsibility of caring each other, being kind to other people. So that was a phenomenal thing. I would say this would be the starting point, and if everybody keeps doing this every day in a regular uh, habit, that will give a lot of solution, that will give a lot of insight to their mind, and that will clear the childhood trauma and then move forward, because we caused this problem, and the same human race has to solve this. We don't have a choice now. So that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Adam.
Thank you. My computer's frozen. Oh no, it hasn't. Okay, earlier
Sorry, I believe he has internet problem. So thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. Actually, World Talent Economy Forum, definitely we are in favor of global peace. Definitely Ukraine issues is it's a very problematic area for around the world, and we should protect it. And side by side, we have to understand there are many unrest even in Middle East. There are unrest in Kashmir. There are unrest in Africa. So even Europe, we are observing there are unrest, and these things we should avoid. And for these particular issues, I strongly believe around the world we always focus on money making business. We always focus on uh, technology and many things, but we need to be very much careful about human. You have to be very much careful about human resource, human peace. So we have to work together. I respect all of your opinions, and anyone want to contribute through World Talent Economy Forums. We want to raise some funds for this Ukraine peoples. If you want to contribute, you can. Even in Malaysia, with many mosques, with university, hospital. We are requesting them that we should support these Ukraine people. So if anyone want to join with us, you can. And side by side, we we want to support the global community through modern science, engineering, and technology. But definitely, we have to protect it. Definitely, we have to protect it right now. So, thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. This is excellent sessions, and I believe all of our speakers they want to contribute for global peace, and we should work together. We should not run behind this kind of wire or anything. So thank you. We have to save Ukraine. We have to save Ukraine people, and this way we can solve many problems together. Maybe. Thank you, Mr. Marshall, Mr. Kumar, Professor Donalds, Madam Dulce, and Professor David J. Kelly for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.